Hello everyone, welcome again to Sunday Evenings with Joe. I'm just so happy to be doing this poem that I'm going to do for you tonight. So delighted, I hope you're going to like it. For the last few weeks I've been attempting to recite some of the greatest poems that were ever written, in my opinion anyway, by some of the greatest poets from the world over. We had England one week, and the next Sunday night we had America, and then we had a Canadian poet. Tonight I'm just so thrilled and honoured to do an Australian poem, and the poet's name was Edward Harrington, and he's dead and gone now for years, but he was just a brilliant poet. God, he could tell a story, he could paint the picture with you, you could feel it. I first heard this poem when I was probably about 7 years of age, and I remember there was a man. He used to go get around our place and he'd be reciting, recitations we'd call them back in the old days, and my father would sometimes bring a few lads home from the pub and they'd be downstairs singing songs, and if this man was there, John Nagle was his name, he'd recite this poem by Edward Harrington called the Kerrigan Boys. At the time I had no idea where Australia was, I had no dream that I would ever live here, of course, and so you can imagine how exciting it is for me to get to do this poem. And here's to you, John Nagle, wherever you are. He'd be about 150 now. Okay, without further ado, this poem doesn't need to be explained at all in any way. It's so well written, it tells its own story from start to finish, so explicitly and clearly. Here we go. The Kerrigan Boys by Edward Harrington. By Jove, it's hot on the track today. My flannel is soaked with sweat. I think I'll sit in the shade a while and wait for the sun to set. I know of a decent camping place by the river beyond the town, and I'd rather carry my swag through there after the sun goes down. A touch of pride, well, perhaps it is, although I haven't much cause for pride. 16 years to the day, almost, since old man Kerrigan died. 16 years and his place is sold, and the fortune he left us, spent. For the road downhill was an easy road, and that was the way we went. Kerrigan, that was our father's name. He was one of the tough old sort, held by graft as he held by God, and he hated drink and sport. We lads were fond of a bit of fun, though he kept us under the rain. We had to bow to the old man's will, though it went against our grain. But he was kind enough, in his hard old way, but we had to earn our keep. Driving horses, milking cows, branding, shearing sheep. No wonder we bucked a bit at times, for you know what youngsters are. Mustn't dance at the local hall or drink in Mulligan's bar. Well, those were the orders the old man gave, but we did it just the same. Jack was 2 years younger than I, so I was the more to blame. But I often thought, had he been less hard, left us a bit more free, might have been better for him perhaps, and better for Jack and me. And then the old man dropped in the yard one day where we had the weaners penned. We picked him up and carried him home, but we knew it was the end. Neighbours gathered from miles around, he hadn't a single foe, and the crowd that stood o'er the open grave spoke well of the man below. We grieved a lot for our father's death, though he left us wealthy men. If we hadn't have known what he meant to us, we realised it then. You see, our only sister had died at birth, our mother was long since dead, and we found we were the only heirs when the old man's will was read. Just a couple of country lads, never been off the farm, been held in check from our boyhood up by the weight of the old man's arm. We were good in the saddle and fair with our fists, with a touch of the old man's pride, but the neighbours muttered and shook their heads when old man Kerrigan died. And hard and all as the old man was, for years he'd kept a stud, for the love of a horse, for the horse's sake, is strong in the Irish blood. But breeding was just a hobby for him, sort of a harmless craze, though I'd often thought he'd had his fling back in his younger days. Then we got mixed up with the racing crowd, started to go the pace, forgot the sound of the old man's voice and the frown on his rugged face. For the road downhill, it's an easy road, and it ends with a swift descent. We were just youngsters, a reckless pair, but that was the way we went. Then we staked for a win on the Chester colt, on the strength of a trial he showed. But someone had got to the boy on top. We could tell by the race he rode. Lost 10 lengths, finished last. It was useless to make a fuss, for the men we met in the racing game were far too cunning for us. And we backed him again in the Greytown Cup, and he won by half the straight. But we left our cash in the bookies' bags, 'cause he failed to draw the weight. We cursed the jockey, we cursed the horse, we sold him there and then. We'd had enough of the racing game, the ways of the racing men. But we could have got out of trouble still had we turned our hands to the plough. But the life of leisure and cards and drink had got the grip on us now. You can call it flashness or call it pride or simply a want of sense. But the publicans and the auctioneers grew wealthy at our expense. We sat and drank in Mulligan's pub. We gambled the whole night long. We dealt in cattle, we dealt in sheep. Sure, most of the deals went wrong. But as long as the banks would cash our cheques, we didn't care what we spent, for the road downhill was an easy road. And that was the way we went. And then things got bad and a drought came on. Lasted over a year. Our stock died off, the dams gave out. We knew the end was near. And then our credit stopped and the bank foreclosed and our father's place was sold. And we knew then we'd wasted all, like the prodigal son of old. And 5 years after the old man's death, together we took the track. We wandered into the nearest town, and I had a drink with Jack. And he wished me luck and shook my hand. I could tell he was close to tears. And I never laid eyes on Jack since then, or heard of him now for years. Somewhere out to the west of Burke, he's humping his swag, maybe, tramping along in the broiling sun, cursing himself and me. But I'd give 2 years of my worthless life, though it may not last that long, for one more look in his honest face, one grip of his fingers strong. Well, that's the tale of the Kerrigan Boys, and the moral is near the end. You'll always have lots of friends at hand, as long as you have cash to spend. We had our chance. We played the fool. It's too late now to repent, for the road downhill was an easy road. And that was the road we went. Edward Harrington wrote that, and it's called The Kerrigan Boys.